September 1940, Berlin. Inside the Reich Chancellery, there's a room that smells like smoke, wet wool, and old paper. The tables are buried under maps of the English Channel, tide charts, weather forecasts, coastal photos, shipping lanes, all of it. Outside that room, Germany's armies look unstoppable. They've rolled over most of continental Europe with speed that shocked the world. From a distance, it feels like the next step is obvious. Cross the Channel, land in Britain, end the war in the West. But inside that room, the mood is different, because now the German High Command has to face one brutal fact. Winning on land does not automatically mean you can cross water. And across those 21 miles of sea sits the one weapon Britain still has in full strength, its Navy. Before we go further, if you like WWII true history that digs into the how and the why, not just the highlight reel, tap subscribe and stay with this series. This story is all about the details that change everything. Now back to that room in Berlin. The top commanders are there. Army, Navy, Air Force. The plan on the table has a name. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. And in meeting after meeting, the same problem keeps choking the plan. The Navy cannot promise safe passage. That's not a slogan, it's a cold calculation. German naval leadership, starting with Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, is basically telling Hitler, we can't keep the channel clear long enough to get an invasion force across, let alone keep it supplied. Army leadership isn't any more comfortable. The German army can fight, it can break fronts, it can move fast. But an invasion is different. An invasion is a machine that lives or dies on supply, timing, and control of the sea. And the German army knows what its soldiers would be riding in, not proper landing ships, barges. A huge chunk of Sea Lion's transport fleet is made up of river barges and canal boats gathered from occupied Europe, flat-bottom vessels built for calm inland water. These were never meant to handle ocean-chopped, strong currents or war at sea. So picture this, thousands of men, horses, trucks, ammo, fuel, packed into slow, awkward craft that can't sprint, can't maneuver well, and can't fight their way out of trouble. And then picture what Britain can throw at them, because the Royal Navy is not a maybe, it's not a rumor, it's real steel that can be on top of you fast. Britain's home fleet has battleships, cruisers, and a deep bench of destroyers ready for short-notice action. Germany, by comparison, is not in a position to fight a major surface battle in the Channel. Germany's biggest ships are not sitting there waiting to escort a crossing. Some are still not ready, and others are tied down by risk, repairs, and reality. Even if Germany wanted to bet everything on one giant Channel fight, it doesn't have the cards. And this is where Sea Lion starts to look less like a bold move and more like a gamble with an entire army. The German army's planners do the math on what an invasion force needs. The first wave alone is massive. Divisions landing on beaches, trying to grab ports, trying to spread out fast before Britain can slam the door. But landing is only the first problem. The bigger problem is what happens after the first day. An invasion force needs food, ammo, fuel, medical supplies, spare parts every single day. Tons of it. Constantly. Not once. Not when convenient. If supplies stop, that force doesn't pause. It collapses. So the Germans would need a steady stream of transport trips across the Channel, again and again. While Britain's navy is hunting, Britain's aircraft are striking, and Britain's coastal defenses are firing. That's why German staff officers kept returning to the same ugly conclusion. Even if the first wave hits the beach, keeping it alive is another story. And the German Navy says the quiet part out loud. They can't protect the crossing long enough. Not for a few hours. Not for the full day. And definitely not for the weeks of resupply an invasion would demand. Now, if you've heard Sea Lion explained before, you've probably heard one simple storyline. Germany couldn't invade because the Luftwaffe lost the Battle of Britain. But here's the thing. In German planning, Sea Lion had major problems even before you argue about who won the air battle. Because the sea problem doesn't go away with a few more fighter patrols. Germany's Air Force could hit ships, sure. It could sink ships, but using air power to keep the Channel safe for days on end, especially at night, especially in bad weather, especially against fast-moving destroyers, that's a different level of difficulty. And the German Navy knows it. Even the most optimistic air plan still leaves a big gap. The Royal Navy can choose when to strike, and it can strike in darkness. British destroyers are built for speed. They can tear through water at high knots and bring guns that shred thin-skinned barges. A destroyer doesn't need to sink a whole invasion column by itself. It just needs to turn the crossing lanes into chaos, hit transports, scatter formations, block routes with wreckage, and force the entire operation to stall in the worst possible place, the middle of the channel. That scenario haunted German naval planners, because in the channel, the geography is tight, the routes are predictable, the tides are tricky, mines are everywhere, and barges can't just swerve and run. They're slow, fragile, and crowded. A single attack at the wrong time could cause a chain reaction. And now the Germans are asking themselves a question no conqueror likes to ask. What if the entire first wave gets wrecked before it even reaches Britain? That's not drama. That's exactly what serious planners have to consider. And to understand why the fear felt so real, you have to look at what the Royal Navy had already done earlier in the war. In Norway, Narvik, April 1940, British naval forces had pushed into dangerous waters, inside a fjord, where the risk was obvious and the margins were tight. Yet they still went in, fought hard, and smashed German destroyer forces in brutal close-range action. A battleship even entered the fjord later and helped finish the job. The message to German naval leadership was clear. The Royal Navy was willing to take losses to complete a mission, and it had the experience to fight at close quarters. Now imagine that mindset applied to Sea Lion. British destroyers charging into packed barge columns, firing at point-blank range, running wild through a formation that can't scatter fast enough. German planners didn't need to fantasize. They could see it. And they understood something else too. Britain wasn't defending the channel as a nice-to-have. Britain was defending it as the center of survival. If Germany crosses, Britain's war is on the line. That means Britain's navy will not sit back and play careful. So in Germany's war rooms, the crossing starts to look like a funnel. Slow craft moving through narrow lanes toward a coast that's ready, while Britain's fastest ships are sprinting in from multiple directions. And that's just the sea. Now add air. Sea Lion requires long hours of air cover over the crossing routes. Not a quick strike, not a burst of action. It requires sustained protection, fighters overhead, constantly guarding slow targets. That is hard even in perfect conditions, and the channel is not known for perfect conditions. Wind changes, visibility collapses, sea state rises, clouds roll in. And even if Germany holds the edge during daylight, what happens when night comes? Britain's navy doesn't need sunlight to fire a broadside into a barge column. This is why the German army, navy, and Luftwaffe kept tripping over the same obstacle. A successful invasion needs everything to go right at the same time. Air superiority, good weather, seas calm enough for barges, a first wave that lands and holds, ports captured quickly and not wrecked, supply runs that keep flowing. And, most important of all, the Royal Navy must somehow be prevented from tearing the operation apart. That is a lot of ifs. And professional staffs don't bet an army on ifs. So even while propaganda shouts about victory and invasion, inside the planning rooms, the real talk is blunt. The operation looks like it could turn into a disaster so big it would erase the invasion force in one day. That fear wasn't because German commanders were suddenly soft. It was because they were looking at a problem their strengths didn't solve. Germany is a land power. It can move armies over roads and rails. It can supply across a continent it controls. Britain is an island power. It lives and breathes sea control. It has centuries of experience doing one thing extremely well, preventing someone from crossing water and living to tell the story. Now rewind for a second. May 1940. Germany has just smashed France in weeks. The British Expeditionary Force escapes through Dunkirk, but in German eyes, Britain looks isolated. That's when planning starts in earnest. How do we finish this? And almost immediately, the reaction from key German commanders is not excitement. It's alarm, because they look at the tools available, especially the transport fleet, and they see a mismatch between ambition and capability. A cross-channel invasion is not just moving troops. It's moving an entire supply ecosystem across water you don't control. And without controlling that water, you are placing your army at the mercy of the Royal Navy. That's why the strongest language in German internal planning wasn't about risk. It was about impossibility. Not in the sense of magic, in the sense of the numbers don't work. Germany can't escort the barges with strong surface forces. Germany can't guarantee air cover for the full crossing and the full resupply phase. Germany can't stop British destroyers from attacking at night. And Germany can't build a proper amphibious fleet out of rivercraft on short notice, no matter how many tugs they gather or how many ramps they bolt onto the front. So Sea Lion becomes the invasion that scares the invaders. And the longer the plan sits, the worse it looks. Because every week, Britain gets more time to build defenses, more time to train troops, more time to harden beaches, more time for the RAF to replace losses, more time for the Royal Navy to refine plans to smash a crossing. Meanwhile, Germany's invasion fleet doesn't magically improve. Barges stay barges. This is why, by late summer 1940, German planning starts to shift from how do we invade to what conditions would we need to invade. And the answer is basically conditions that Germany cannot create. Absolute naval control of the channel, or something close to it, and Germany cannot get that in 1940. Not quickly, maybe not ever. So when Hitler asks, can we do it? The people who actually have to execute it keep circling back to the same conclusion. Launching now could mean losing the whole force before it even touches British sand. That is why, in September 1940, the invasion date keeps sliding, postponed again, and then without a clean announcement. It starts to fade into something else. A threat used for pressure, not a plan meant to happen. But none of this explains the second layer, the one most people never hear. Because even if the Germans could somehow survive the crossing, what exactly would be waiting on the beaches? German aerial photos showed open shoreline, roads inland, and what looked like weak defenses. But that picture was incomplete. And in the next part of this story, you'll see why German air planners slowly realized they weren't even fighting the enemy they thought they were fighting, because Britain's air system production and coastal preparations were turning Sea Lion from risky into dead on arrival. That's where the fear stops being a theory and becomes a countdown. Stop. By late summer 1940, Sea Lion had a problem that couldn't be spun away. The German Navy didn't control the channel, but Hitler kept pressing for answers, and the Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, was the one branch that could still claim, "We can make this work." Their argument was simple on paper. If the Luftwaffe could beat down RAF fighter command, then German aircraft could cover the crossing lanes, hammer British ships, and keep the Royal Navy far enough back for the barges to crawl across. That logic is why the Battle of Britain matters in this story. But here's the catch. German air plans for Sea Lion were built on assumptions that didn't hold up in reality, and even German pilots started to notice the cracks, because they weren't just trying to win a normal air campaign. They were trying to create a very specific condition. The sky over the invasion route had to be safe for hours, day after day, right when Britain would be throwing everything it had at that exact strip of water. That is a different level of requirement, and it's the reason the Luftwaffe's optimism slowly started to sound less like confidence and more like wishful thinking. German intelligence reports in August 1940 often carried a bold tone at the top. RAF strength is collapsing. The British are running out. Air superiority is close. But buried in the fine print, the warnings kept showing up. The RAF's true strength was uncertain. British radar stations were still operating. Production estimates were shaky. Reconnaissance needed to continue. In other words, we think we're winning, but we're not actually sure what we're facing. That's not a small problem. That's a huge one, because you don't start the largest amphibious assault in history while guessing. And German pilots, especially fighter pilots, were the first to feel something was off. They'd go up, fight hard, claim kills, watch aircraft fall, and come back believing the RAF had to be near empty. Then they'd go up the next day and see more Hurricanes, more Spitfires, not fewer, more. That experience created a slow, ugly realization inside the Luftwaffe. Britain wasn't collapsing the way Germany expected. Britain was replacing losses, sometimes faster than Germany could inflict them. And Britain was doing it while keeping its defense system intact, especially the one thing Germany struggled to truly smash, the radar and control network. This matters because the RAF wasn't just a pile of planes. It was a machine. Radar sites detected incoming raids. Controllers tracked formations. Fighters were directed to intercept points with timing that made German raids feel like they were running into a trap. For Sea Lion, that system was deadly because an invasion requires predictability, slow craft moving through fixed corridors at fixed speeds, and the RAF, guided by radar, could choose when to hit and where to hit. Right at the moment, those barges were most vulnerable. Now imagine the Luftwaffe's job in that situation. To protect the invasion fleet, German fighters would have to stay low, stay close, and stay on station. They couldn't chase targets far inland. They couldn't roam freely. They had to sit over the water and guard slow-moving barges like a shield. That is a nightmare for a fighter force. Flying low burns fuel and reduces visibility. Staying near one point makes you predictable. And the RAF has the home field advantage. Short flight times, rapid refuel, and the ability to throw fighters into the fight in waves. German fighters, by contrast, would be operating near the edge of their effective range from airfields in France and the Low Countries. That means less time over the target, less fuel margin, more pressure to break off early. And if you're trying to cover a 10-hour crossing, that's a problem that doesn't go away with bravery. It's physics. The Luftwaffe faced another issue too. The closer you are to the channel, the more you're forced into a defensive posture. If your job is to protect the barges, you can't always take the best altitude, the best angle, the best energy position. The RAF can. British fighters can start high, dive with speed, hit hard, and climb away. German fighters stuck low and slow are constantly reacting. That is exactly what German fighter leaders complained about in their operational thinking. Protecting barges would give the British the advantage. And even if the Luftwaffe could handle the RAF problem, there was still the Royal Navy problem, because air power can damage and sink ships, but it cannot seal the channel like a wall. British destroyers could charge in at night. They could move fast, strike quick, and withdraw. They could split into multiple groups. They could take losses and keep coming. And the German Navy knew that, which is why its position barely changed. We cannot promise the crossing will be protected. So Sea Lion sat on a narrow, fragile bridge made of two hopes. Hope the RAF breaks. Hope the Royal Navy stays away. Neither hope looked reliable by September. Meanwhile, Britain wasn't waiting. Britain was turning the coastline into a machine designed to crush a landing. From the air, German photographs showed beaches that looked usable. Wide sand, gentle slopes, roads inland. German planners saw what they wanted to see. Space to land troops and push forward quickly. But aerial photos don't show everything. They don't show what's buried. They don't show what's camouflaged. They don't show what moves after reconnaissance flights. And Britain knew German aircraft were watching, so Britain designed defenses with that in mind. Artillery was a big part of it. Britain positioned guns so they could fire directly onto likely landing beaches and approach routes. Some positions were fixed and camouflaged. Others were mobile, shifting locations. The point was not just to defend the shore. The point was to hit landing craft the moment they slowed down in shallow water, when troops were packed tight and had nowhere to go. And Britain had weapons that were especially nasty for that job. Field artillery could throw shells into crowded beach zones. Machine guns could rake open sand. And rapid-fire guns like the Bofors 40mm, normally thought of as anti-aircraft, could also be used against small craft and vehicles when fired flat and direct. A barge is not armored. A barge is basically a floating target. Then came the obstacles. Britain didn't treat beaches as natural ground. They treated them like engineered kill zones, barbed wire in layers, concrete blocks and posts, anti-tank obstacles, mines, lots of mines, not just on sand, but in the approaches, in the shallows, in likely exits off the beach, and near roads leading inland. Germany's engineers understood what that meant. If barges hit obstacles or mines in the surf zone, the landing force piles up. If the landing force piles up, it becomes a tight cluster, and tight clusters get erased by artillery and machine guns. But the defenses most likely to shock German infantry weren't the mines or the wire. It was the pillbox network. Britain built hundreds of reinforced concrete positions covering likely landing areas. These weren't flimsy trenches. These were small fortresses designed to survive shelling, hide from quick observation, and keep firing. They were arranged to overlap fields of fire so that one position supported another. If an attacker tried to rush one pillbox, they could be hit from the side by a second one, and many of these positions were camouflaged to blend into the landscape, so what looked empty from a distance could suddenly wake up with machine gun fire. British machine gun teams using reliable medium machine guns like the Vickers were trained for sustained fire. That matters because a landing isn't a 5-minute firefight. An invasion is hours of chaos. A weapon that can keep firing, stay cool, and keep the beach swept is exactly what a defender wants. Now add the next layer, the mobile reserves. German planners often imagined coastal defense as static, guns on the shore, troops in fixed points. But Britain's thinking wasn't hold the beach forever and hope. It was hit the invaders while they're weakest. The weakest moment is not after they land and form up. The weakest moment is when they're still unloading, still scattered, still stuck between water and fire. So Britain positioned forces inland that could move fast and counterattack quickly. Regular units, not just local guards. That meant even if the Germans got a foothold, the clock would immediately start ticking, because Britain would try to throw them back into the sea before they could stabilize. And for Germany, the first waves were planned to be infantry heavy. Armor was hard to land quickly with the transport options Germany had. That is a major issue. Infantry alone, arriving tired and disorganized, facing prepared defenses and fast counterattacks, is already in trouble. Infantry arriving without solid resupply is doomed. This is where the entire operation starts to look like a trap. The channel crossing is deadly, the beaches are deadly, and the window to succeed is tiny. Then you get to the part American audiences often misunderstand, the home guard. In movies, it's usually played for laughs. Old men with armbands, missing gear, goofy training. But in 1940, Britain's home guard was massive in size and deeply integrated into local defense plans. Many members were veterans. And more important than their humor value was their role in creating a constant threat behind any landing. Even if German units pushed inland, they would face resistance tied to local knowledge, roads, shortcuts, hidden routes, terrain, and the psychological weight of that mattered, because Germany's plan required clean supply lines from the beachhead to objectives inland. Disruption behind the lines, bridges, roads, small attacks, sabotage could slow everything. And in a high-pressure invasion, slowing everything can be fatal. Meanwhile, German intelligence had a major problem. It didn't have a clear picture of Britain's defenses. Aerial reconnaissance was limited by weather and camouflage. Human intelligence inside Britain was weak and unreliable by that stage of the war, so German planners were staring at a foggy outline and trying to guess what was inside it. That's a bad place to be when you're deciding whether to send 160,000 men across water in improvised craft. And that intelligence weakness made German command even more cautious, because if you don't know the true strength of defenses, you have to plan for worst case. Worst case for Sea Lion was horrifying. Now step back and look at the combined problem set. The Royal Navy can strike the transport lanes quickly, especially at night. The Luftwaffe cannot guarantee air dominance over the crossing zone for the required length of time. The RAF is not collapsing the way German leaders hoped. Britain's coast is layered with artillery, obstacles, mines, and reinforced positions. Britain has mobile reserves ready to counterattack fast. Germany's ability to land armor early is limited. Germany's ability to resupply is dependent on a sea corridor it does not control. If any one of those elements goes wrong, the invasion force can be isolated and destroyed. And the truly terrifying part is this: multiple elements were already going wrong before the invasion even began. By September 1940, the Luftwaffe had taken serious losses. The RAF was still contesting the skies. Radar remained functional enough to guide defense. The weather window was narrowing, and the German Navy's core message hadn't changed. We cannot protect the crossing, so the invasion planning started to shift in tone, not officially, not publicly, but inside staff work. You can feel the drift from launch to postpone, from schedule to conditions, from how to what else can we do instead. And the closer September got, the more the invasion started looking like something Germany would threaten but not actually execute, because Germany had a lot of courage. But courage doesn't tow barges faster. Courage doesn't sink the home fleet. Courage doesn't replace lost fuel margins over the channel. Courage doesn't remove mines from a beach at night while artillery is firing. By late summer, Sea Lion was becoming what professionals call a mission that depends on perfection. Perfect weather, perfect timing, perfect air cover, perfect surprise, perfect success on the beach, perfect capture of ports, perfect supply flow. And in war, perfection is a fantasy. By September 1940, Sea Lion wasn't dying because of one dramatic event. It was dying because every serious calculation kept pointing to the same end state. If Germany launches, the invasion force is at extreme risk of being wiped out, either in the channel, on the beaches, or in the days immediately after. This is where the story becomes less about speeches and more about professional military reality. Because when German staffs planned operations, they didn't just feel their way through. They broke down supply requirements, movement rates, weather windows, ship speeds, casualty projections, and timing. They treated war like engineering. And Sea Lion failed that engineering test. The naval side remained the most terrifying. The channel is narrow, but it's not small. It's a contested space with currents, shifting weather, minefields, and limited safe lanes. Exactly the kind of environment where a fast surface force can ruin a slow transport operation. German planners understood a hard truth. They could not keep British warships out of the channel for the amount of time required. Even if German aircraft hit British ships during the day, Britain could push destroyers in at night, strike transport columns, and withdraw before German aircraft could respond effectively. And because the invasion fleet was built around barges and towed craft, the fleet couldn't outrun trouble. It couldn't maneuver quickly. It couldn't defend itself well. And it had to stay in rigid corridors to avoid mines and shallow water. That rigidity is deadly. It means the British don't have to find you in the open ocean. They can aim for the lanes. So German naval staff increasingly described the channel crossing as a situation where disaster could happen fast, and once it started, it would spread. A barge hit in the wrong spot doesn't just sink. It blocks the lane. It forces other craft to pile up. It turns order into chaos. And chaos in the channel means drowning, burning fuel, lost equipment, broken schedules, and units landing late or not at all. The German army understood that too, and their fear had a specific shape: supply. An invasion force isn't just soldiers with rifles. It's ammunition, fuel, food, medical support, radios, spare parts, engineers, bridges, trucks, everything. The German plan assumed it could move a large force across and then keep the pipeline flowing. But the pipeline was a thin straw across water Britain could cut. The numbers were brutal. Keeping a large landing force alive meant thousands of tons of supplies per day. That translates into constant traffic, transport trips every day, in all conditions under constant threat. And Germany didn't have the kind of amphibious lift that makes that sustainable. Germany was improvising amphibious warfare with inland barges, small motorboats, and tugs. Even if you ignore the enemy, the sea itself could break that system. Moderate waves can swamp low freeboard craft. Wind can scatter formations. Poor visibility can cause collisions. And one collision in a narrow lane can cascade into a jam. German training exercises on captured coasts exposed this in a humiliating way. The army tried practice landings, and even without enemy fire, they were messy. Barges grounded wrong. Troops disembarked into deep water. Vehicles bogged. Equipment got lost. That kind of chaos in training is survivable. That kind of chaos under British artillery and air attack is fatal. So by mid-September 1940, the three pieces Sea Lion depended on were failing to lock into place. The Navy still could not protect the crossing. The Luftwaffe could not guarantee long-duration air control over the crossing lanes. The Army could not guarantee that a landed force could be supplied before Britain counterattacked and the Royal Navy cut the pipeline. And then there was the factor that makes every planner nervous: intelligence gaps. German intelligence had enough information to know Britain was preparing heavily, but it didn't have enough information to know the exact depth, the exact placement, and the exact doctrine of Britain's defensive system. Aerial photos showed obstacles and terrain, but they missed camouflaged guns, mobile batteries, and hidden positions. Human intelligence inside Britain was thin and often unreliable. So German command was forced into worst-case planning, and worst-case planning for Sea Lion looked like this. The Royal Navy arrives in force. The RAF still contests the air. The beaches are pre-sighted by artillery. The first wave takes massive losses. Ports are damaged or unusable. Resupply falters. British mobile reserves hit the beachhead before Germany can stabilize. That is how an invasion becomes an execution. The most damning internal conclusion wasn't, "It will be costly." It was, "Success requires every element to go perfectly." And the probability of perfection was essentially zero. That's why, as September 1940 approached, Sea Lion shifted into a different category inside German planning. Not a real operation, but a pressure tool. And this is where we reach the key date, September 17th, 1940. Another high-level meeting in Berlin. No flashy minutes, no big public announcement, but multiple German sources after the war point to the same outcome. Hitler postponed Sea Lion indefinitely. Not until next week. Not until the tides are better. Indefinitely. The timing matters because Sea Lion's original schedule depended on a narrow window, tides, daylight, and weather conditions that gave at least a chance of moving slow craft across. If the operation slipped into October, the channel's weather becomes more dangerous. Seas get rougher, visibility gets worse. The whole barge-based transport concept becomes even more fragile. So when the invasion date moved past mid-September, it wasn't just a delay. It was a quiet admission that the window was closing, and everyone in the room would have understood what spring 1941 would really mean if someone tried to bring it up. 6 months. 6 months for Britain to harden the coast even more. 6 months for the RAF to build more fighters and train more pilots. 6 months for the Royal Navy to refine interception plans. 6 months for mines, obstacles, and pillboxes to multiply. Sea Lion already looked nearly impossible in September 1940. By spring 1941, it would be worse. And Germany's ability to improve its amphibious capability over that same period was limited. So the postponement wasn't a tactical pause, it was an operational death sentence. What happened next is the part people miss. The behavior changes. Divisions earmarked for Sea Lion start getting moved and repurposed. The transport fleet starts drifting back toward normal duties. Training intensity drops. Staff attention shifts. Because the military doesn't lie to itself for long. Not at that level. If planning stops, it's because the plan is no longer real. Sea Lion stays alive on paper longer than it stays alive in practice. And the reason it stays alive on paper is simple. Deception. Germany had a motive to keep Britain nervous. If Britain believed invasion was still on the table, Britain would keep troops tied down along the coast, troops that couldn't be used elsewhere. So Sea Lion became a shadow, a threat to shape British behavior, not a project that Germany expected to execute. Meanwhile, Hitler's strategic focus begins to drift toward other options: air attack, submarine warfare, pressure, and eventually new campaigns in different theaters. Because if you can't cross the channel, you either find another way to force Britain out, or you change the map of the war. Now here's the question that usually pops up. Why did Hitler accept this? This is the same Hitler who later demanded armies fight to destruction in hopeless situations. The same Hitler who refused withdrawals, who treated retreat like a personal insult, who punished commanders for realism. So why, in 1940, did he accept the military conclusion that Sea Lion couldn't be launched? The answer is that even Hitler, especially in 1940, could recognize one kind of reality. Some operations require capabilities you either have or you don't. Germany did not have naval supremacy in the Channel. Germany did not have the amphibious lift to replace naval supremacy. Germany could not guarantee air conditions that would substitute for sea control. And launching anyway risked something Germany couldn't afford to lose: a large chunk of its trained army in one catastrophic event. That's the part that makes Sea Lion different from later fight-to-the-end disasters. Stalingrad was a land battle with land routes, even if badly threatened. Sea Lion would have been a mass movement of troops across water, where losing control doesn't mean we retreat. It means drowning, burning, ships sinking in lanes, units lost before they even enter a real land campaign. That kind of loss is immediate and irreversible. In 1940, Germany's high command didn't just worry about casualties. They worried about annihilation. And it wasn't just fear of Britain's navy. It was fear of Britain's total defensive system, the Royal Navy in the Channel, the RAF contesting airspace, radar feeding interceptions, artillery pre-sighted on beaches, obstacles, wire, mines, pillboxes with overlapping fields of fire, mobile reserves primed to counterattack at the moment of unloading, a massive home defense force integrated into local resistance. In other words, even a successful crossing didn't guarantee a meaningful foothold, because if supplies were cut, the landing force could be pinned and crushed, and Germany's own operational reality made that supply cut likely. By late September 1940, even Britain starts to sense the shift. British intelligence is good at reading signals, sometimes literally, and they watch German invasion preparations lose momentum. British leadership is cautious, but confidence rises. The immediate invasion threat is fading, and that's the point most Hollywood stories don't highlight. Not because it's boring, because it flips the narrative. The common movie version is Britain in 1940 is helpless and barely hanging on, waiting for rescue. The deeper version is Britain in 1940 is building an invasion trap so lethal that Germany's professional planners won't walk into it. This isn't about claiming Britain was untouchable in every domain. Germany had strengths. Germany had momentum. Germany had a dangerous air force and a brutal submarine arm. But an amphibious invasion against an island nation with naval dominance is a special kind of problem. Germany's leaders calculated the cost and decided it was beyond what they could accept. And they left behind a trail of internal assessments and professional warnings that all point to the same thing. Sea Lion wasn't canceled because someone lost their nerve. It was postponed because the operation didn't pencil out. It required too many miracles. Then the war moves on, and the divisions that were supposed to storm British beaches end up training for something else, something Germany believes is more achievable. The Balkans, North Africa, and ultimately, the East. Sea Lion fades, and later histories debate it endlessly. But if you strip away the propaganda and look at the operational logic, the conclusion is straightforward. Germany never had the combination of naval control, air control, transport capacity, and intelligence clarity needed to risk the Channel crossing. Britain didn't need to win a single invasion battle to stop Sea Lion. Britain needed to make the invasion math unacceptable. And Britain did, through naval dominance that could smash transport lanes, through an air defense system that could stay in the fight, through coastal defenses built to kill landing forces at the shoreline, through reserves ready to counterattack before a beachhead could stabilize, through intelligence and deception that kept Germany guessing. So when you ask, why didn't Germany invade Britain? The answer is not, they just didn't feel like it. The answer is, the professionals looked at the problem and saw a disaster waiting. A cross-channel invasion in 1940 would have required Germany to do the hardest military operation in the world with the wrong tools, under contested skies, across water controlled by the enemy, against an island that had prepared to fight for its life. Germany could win battles on land, but Britain owned the moat, and Britain turned that moat into a grave. If this story changed the way you see 1940, hit the like button. Seriously, it tells the algorithm this kind of WWII deep dive is worth pushing out. Because the big truth here is simple. Britain didn't survive by luck. Britain survived by making invasion impossible. And once Germany admitted that to itself, Sea Lion became what it really was by the end of 1940, a plan that died in the planning room. Stop.